Hello, everybody. Welcome to Unfinished Projects. As you can probably tell by my voice, this is not Cesar. This is Dexter. Many of you will know me as Paz or Paz. And we thought we'd give him a little breather this week. Instead, you're going to sit here with me, and we are going to speed paint this ogre. Now, this ogre comes from a kit from Wargames Atlantic. It's called The Vein. It's a sci-fi and fantasy dual kit. So you can tell he's got a very Renaissance style outfit on. But the combat knife and the grenade in his hand have a distinctly modern look. And I picked up this kit because my custom guard regiment, I wanted them to have a sort of historical war games feel while still being, sci-fi at its core. And I thought, Wargames Atlantic, they have these dual-use kits. If I want to be able to put some Ogren bodyguards on my Imperial Guard officers, that sounds just about perfect, right? So I got them put together. I combined the sci-fi and the fantasy aspects about as well as I could. And I got them mostly primed white. You can see there's some spots where the primer didn't really go on perfectly. That can be a little bit of a problem with army painters' primers. I really like their paints in general, but I seem like I never have anything but issues with their primer. Anyhow, you can tell right off the bat I also don't use a painting handle. I probably really should, but the painting is not my passion. I leave that for Cesar, I leave that for others. I'm not all about the painting. I do it mostly so I can get my armies on the field, and as long as they don't look like complete and total garbage, I'm mostly usually just okay with that. For instance, this buddy right here is about the best I can ever manage to do painting myself, and even then, you can tell I'm not exactly perfect, right? But we do the best we can. So, to start, well, I suppose I should talk about what I'm using, right? Speed paint, also from the Army Painter. I like it. It requires no thinning. It's got the wash built right in. It's a quote-unquote one-coat solution, and I've found it's really as good as it says in that regard. So you give your bottle a little shake. Very convenient. They all come in dropper lids. Now this one is Gravelord Gray. Ordinarily, I would do these fellas armor plating in an actual silver because I'm a sucker for metallic paints. But in this instance, I wanted to go with this because I want to have a little more tarnished look to it. So, the nice thing about speed paint, oh gosh, should have practiced this a little bit first, as it goes right on. You can already see the wash-like effect. How it requires very little in the way of working and managing. You just take your cheap dollar store brushes like mine, and you make sure you get it right down into the recesses where you want it. And for me, that means evening it out amongst the links of the chainmail there and into the armor plate. Then we dab a little more on our brush, get right back to it. Now, as far as Warhammer goes, as any of you who are watching are fans, and I'd hope most of you are, you know the game is currently in its 9th edition. If you've been following my adventure into Warhammer, you also know that 9th edition has not been good to my boys in the Imperial Guard. We were very late to receive our codex, and the 8th edition codex really didn't have much of a place for our abhuman Ogren. Now, a lot of people ran them anyways, because the Imperial Guard has very little in the way of melee-capable units, things that can fight effectively in the charge phase and in the combat phase. And despite their relative weakness, the Ogren were still one of those. But now, with the eventual final release of our 9th edition codex, we've got a neat new trick. And that is to say, we can now take these big lovable dummies, and for just the points of the model, we can add them to our officers and our command squads, like you could in previous editions of the game, and like you still can in Horus Heresy 2nd edition, called a retinue. So for just the points of the model, all of a sudden, maybe you're not taking a whole unit of them, but you're tacking on a multi-wound, melee-capable unit to your very, very squishy guard officers and giving them a much-needed bullet shield. That's exactly what these guys are going to be. The commissariat has told them that, to quote the video game Darktide, they must protect the little ones, especially the ones with lots of shinies on their uniform. So we're going to rub some more on there. It looks mighty dark right now, but having used this paint before, I can promise you it is going to come out a nice tarnished gray, as promised. We're going to move on to the back plate here. You'll notice its armor is damaged. It's got big gouges in it. So we're going to take special care to let the paint sit in there. And that's where speed paint really shines. Having the wash built right into the formula does a wonderful job of providing shadowing and depth without having to be a world-class painter like my associate is. So we're just gonna get it in there, make sure it's worked in there, and maybe take just a little bit more, dab it in so it pools just a little bit. Then in between that chainmail hauberk and those leather straps, and real carefully just try to hit the edges there. Then we're going to get this last armor panel. Get the underside there. And that's about as much precision painting as we're going to have to do there. Dab just a little more on the front. Now for that same tarnished metal effect, just going to slather it all over his shield here. And that's the thing about the Ogren and the Bulgren units in your guard armies, right? You always want them to have some sort of shield. In the actual GW Games Workshop official kit, that typically works out to some sort of absolutely massive riot shield, the size of a full-grown man. But for me, I don't think it needs to be much more than a buckler. At least not on this one in particular. When I get to some of the other ones, for instance, like this fella, some of them are going to get custom-made shields from popsicle sticks. But not for this buddy. So we're going to hit that. And hit this armor panel on his shoulder here. The miracle of speed paint, I tell ya. It's a lifesaver for people like me who want to dabble in this, but aren't skilled enough or don't want to commit the time and energy to really getting it right and learning the ins and outs of the GW contrast system with their 18 million paints to make one color. I like one coat and done. I really do. Now I think, just to keep with the metals theme, I'm also going to take and hit the grenade in his hand there, real carefully. Now, when speed paint first came out, there was a little bit of controversy because the paints quote-unquote reactivated. Now, as it turns out, that was a little bit of a mind game because the YouTube painter, I guess I am one now officially too, who was making that claim was not using them as a one-coat paint. But even for amateurs like me, we're using the product as intended for a one-coat paint solution, something we have to be careful of when we go to do touch-up work. Like most washes, because speed paint does have the wash integrated right into the paint formula, you have to be careful to let it dry longer than you might other paints, because the wash part of the formula does take longer to dry than conventional paint. So we're going to set him down for just a moment so I can rinse my brush off here. And then with the metals just about covered, we'll go on to our next color. Can't see this, but off screen I'm drying my brush real quick. And now I've got cheapo dollar store paint palettes. But because I am the cheapo, and I am anyhow, I'm actually going to clean it out instead of letting the paint sit in it, so I can reuse it that much more and really get my money's worth. So there was our Gray Velour Gray. Next, I wanted to go with some fun colors for his clothing. So we are going to hit some of them with orc skin. Some nice green pantaloons for our Ogren friend. How's that sound? So we'll take our dropper bottle, squeeze a little out, and get right back to it. Just as before, go straight on the brush, straight onto the model. Look at that beautiful green. I think this orc skin green is maybe the best of the speed paint line. Now, I don't use it much because I just don't use green in a lot of my color schemes. But it's hard to deny that inbuilt wash for the shading does exactly what it's supposed to, especially in this color. So we're just going to keep working it in, making sure it gets into all those grooves and recesses. As nice frilly pants here. You'll have to pardon me if my sniffles come through in the final audio. I'm going to do my best to trim them out. I am just a little bit snuffly, a little phlegmy, gummed up. But the painting pile waits for no man and tolerates no illness. So if you've got models to paint, sit down and do it. It's never a wasted afternoon. And they call it a hobby for a reason, because you'll never regret the time you spend on it. And this, how I keep flipping them over, trying to get the angles just right, is why everyone and their mother tells me to get a painting handle, so that you can manipulate it more like that without issues. And you know what? Truthfully, could probably buy some cork and make my own if I don't want to pay GW blood money for one of their Citadel branded ones. And maybe, just maybe, I'll do that this weekend. But for now, this evening, just me and you, I'm going to go ahead and just keep grabbing them by dry spots I haven't painted yet. The hardest part of model painting not just on GW, but on all model kits, even bigger ones like this, and like tanks and armored fighting vehicles, is getting every spot. And while a lot of times you really only need what's going to be visible from a fair distance away on the table, I tend to have a little bit of a tick about that, and I try to get every spot my brush can reach. Now, let's see. You know, I was going to do his shirt in green too, but I think maybe I'll do his hat in green and do his shirt in red. How does that sound? Nice Christmassy Ogren bodyguard. Now, the thing I hate about painting hats or helmets or any such thing on any model is the brims and the undersides. As you can see, speed paint goes right on top. Easy enough, easy as you please, right? But then you gotta flip him the other way around and worry about getting the underside without getting paint also all over their faces. In the face of any model, ask any of your friends who do this, or as you know yourself if you are a model painter, the face is the hardest part without getting splotches, colors that don't belong on it. Okay, and it looks like we got one recess left in there. Prod my brush in there the best we can. And already it looks like a little bit didn't settle quite right. So we'll layer some more on right there. And that's the other nice thing about speed paint, is if it doesn't sit quite right, you can basically just keep piling it on. Just pile it on and work it in till it does. Oh, sorry about that. Here we are so far. Nice pretty green hat and trousers. Big mean looking knife. Hand grenade. Carefully set them down. Rinse my brush off again. We'll pick our next color. I think next we're going to do his belts and straps and his codpiece. For that, I think I'm going to go with a nice hardened leather. Much like the orc skin green, this hardened leather is a speed paint that never fails to come out just right. Really one of the best in their line. So, we're going to start with his back here. Now this is where you'll want to be more careful, because you're working around areas you've already got paint sitting on. And like I said, it's nowhere near dry yet because of how speed paint works. And even with all these adorable tools, cheats and workarounds I use, it's where you'll also see my personal deficiencies as a painter still hanging out. Not bad. Then we're going to get his belt. Only 20 minutes into the video. It's already old hat, right? Could not possibly be easier to work with. I don't even need to explain what's going on anymore. You already know. Now, when doing any kind of model painting, as I said before, you really don't want to leave any primer exposed, but especially not on areas where there's a reasonable chance of someone spotting it. Okay. So we've got the straps across there. We've got his belt. If you look carefully, you'll see he's also got straps on his arm there. So we'll hit that. We wouldn't want anyone thinking he couldn't keep his armor plate on his shoulder there on securely. There we go. Now if you look carefully at his face, you'll see he's also chomping a cigar. For my money, I like to hit the cigars with a leather brown too, so that people really get the point. And here is already a perfect example of what I mean when I diss myself as a painter, and when I talk about the absolute pain it is try and paint faces. Speed paint's greatest strength is also its greatest weakness. As marketed, It ran right into the recesses, namely off the cigar and into his open mouth and nostril. So I will have to fix that after it dries. We're at 30 minutes already, and true to our name, I am going to leave this project unfinished. Thank you for tuning in, and next week we'll be right back with Cesar, the real pro. Thanks, everybody.